That legacy already.
Yeah, the peanut butter went first.
I just want cake.
You didn't want cake?
No, I just want cake. I don't care if it's messy.
And then there's banana bread and different kinds of cookies, other than the kind you made. This one?
Yeah. Yes, please.
Yellow cake and then there's...
Don't mind me.
It's okay. I was like, wait, what's going on?
What's to get the food? What's to get the food?
I can't eat it, so I just
Okay, all right.
Okay.
Sandwich?
So that's tabbouleh.
It's just Greek salad.
Okay.
Oh, yeah, a whole bunch. Can I have a whole bunch? Take this one.
That this was the secret number. If you could guess who wrote the piece and who
Well done. Hey, how's it going? I finally got it working.
got the prize. So as soon as they announced this is a mystery song, my dad would head for the very first payphone. The radio would be up, he could hear it, he would go to the payphone, he dialed all the numbers except the last one. And when the final note played, boop, he hit that last key. And you know, he loved jazz and he knew jazz so well. He won the prize so many times that the host of the show
that looks
eventually
great.
banned him from ever
the
calling
sunset.
in and trying to guess. Yeah, that was my dad. So, when he was about 10 years old, his three older siblings told him that he could tag along with them. And his siblings were 8, 10, and 12 years older, so there was a very large gap. So they took the train from New Jersey to New York City because they wanted to hear live jazz music. I think Rocky's already gone, but I think he would appreciate this story. So, no problem, the three siblings got in. But when it came to my dad, the bouncer said, hey, not you. And my dad said, but why? I did all of my homework. And he, just like you guys giggled, I got to imagine that bouncer must have found that pretty winning and he let him in. And I'm pretty sure that was the night that he got to hear Billie Holiday sing. And my dad didn't, my dad put away money for good causes, but one of the things he was willing to spend money on was to go hear jazz, especially the greats. And when they passed through Hawaii, he would take us with him. So this brings me to when he's in his mid-teens, that he went to his mother and he said, Mom, he called her Mutti, that's the German word for mother. Mutti, he said, I do not want to follow my older brother and become a doctor. I want to be a jazz musician. I want to play the clarinet. And his mother shook her head and she said, your choices are you can become a doctor or you could become a doctor. End of story. My dad said he was really unhappy, really miserable that someone else had picked out the future of the rest of his life. But when he was 18, there was a newly published book by a Dr. Ignat Semmelweis. He was a Hungarian Jewish doctor. Remember, my dad and his family were Hungarian Jews. So right there, that piqued his interest. And this doctor was a scientist, and he was a physician in a maternity ward, a maternity hospital. And back then in the 1800s, when doctors delivered a baby, they delivered the baby, wiped their hands on the front of their white medical coat, went to the next woman giving birth, delivered the baby, wiped their hand, and so on and so forth. At the end of the day, the doctor who had the most on his jacket was top dog. It was a sign of prestige. And Dr. Semmelweis had no way to prove it, but he thought that there might be a connection between not washing your hands and this catastrophic disease called childbed fever, that perfectly healthy women would come in, give birth, they would deliver the baby, and about 3 days later these women died an agonizing death. So he brought it forth not just within his hospital, but within the medical community. And he said, why don't we just try this? What do we got to lose? Let's just try washing our hands with soap and water between each patient. He was ridiculed. also, he went about doing that himself. Before he touched the first patient in the morning and in between all the subsequent ones, he thoroughly washed his hands with soap and water. And guess what? The death rate amongst the women whose babies he delivered, those women and their babies, it plummeted. You would think all the doctors in that region would have gone, oh my God, he figured out the cure for childbed fever. Let's do it. They didn't. The ridicule went to torment upon torment upon torment, till they finally were able to get him committed to an insane asylum, where the guards there beat Dr. Ignat Semmelweis so brutally, he died 2 weeks later. I think about my dad, 18 years old, reading about this Hungarian Jewish doctor, and instead of being horrified at what happened to him, it inspired him that here is a doctor that was willing to go up against the establishment, that was willing to do whatever it took to help his patients achieve a better, healthy outcome at any cost. And so my dad went to his mom and he said, I'm going to become a doctor. So when my mom's cancer returned, some of us, her kids, took her to see different oncologists to see what her options were going to be. And this one physician, funnily enough, because my dad did his residency at St. Francis in Liliha, was a doctor whose office was in that same hospital. It wasn't called that anymore. And he looked at her record and he said, any relation to Dr. Fred Dodge? And when there was acknowledgement, he said, I want you to know that for years, and I mean years, I hated Dr. Fred Dodge. I hated him with every bone in my body. He gave every doctor in this state a bad name. His first offense was that back then, when doctors visited their patients in the hospital, it wasn't required, but it was expected that they would show up in a button shirt with a jacket, pressed slacks, shiny black shoes, and a tie. My dad quit wearing that. My mom sewed him a few drawstring bell-bottom pants. My favorite was his green paisley. He put on a t-shirt, sandals, grew his hair shaggy long, and made the rounds. My dad's, when I asked him about it, he said, you know, it's already intimidating enough to go to a doctor. What if you find that you're going to die? He said, you know, the only way you can tease out all the information you need to get an idea of everything that's going on with that patient, what their mindset is, what's going on physically, what their diet is at home, what the stress is at home, what the stress is at work. He says, you got to make them relax. They got to feel like you're their friend. And he said, if I'm there leaning over them in a monkey suit, he said, they're going to clam up. They're not going to give me anything. So the doctor said that was his first offense. His second offense is he told his patients to call him Fred. He said, we went to school for a minimum of 8 years. We deserve to be called doctors. How dare he? And he said the final offense, the one that broke the medical community's back at the time, was the front page of the newspaper one day when they woke up and read it. Dr. Fred Dodge arrested for protesting the Vietnam War. Dr. Fred Dodge attending this protest. He wasn't the only name, but reading that name, they said the shame that he brought upon the medical community statewide. He said, I hated him. I hated him with every bone in my body. But now, he said, and this is 2007, this doctor says, now there's not a physician in the state that I respect more. My dad loved the people of the West Side, and he loved this place. And even though we're going to spread his ashes next year on Kauai, I know his heart and spirit are here. Thank you.
Whoa, got me enthused. I haven't heard that story yet. Eric, you ready? All right. So we have asked certain people in our community if they would come up and share about my dad, because like they knew him maybe when he first got to Wai'anae, or they worked closely with him. Really the main purpose of this gathering was to give our Wai'anae community the opportunity to share with each other, you know, experience and stories about my dad. And you know, we like the good, we like the bad, we like the funny, we like the ugly. It's all good, yeah. And so we have Eric Enos up here, gonna talk story a little bit, and then we're gonna have Chrissy come up, and then, you know, we want to kind of just pass the mic around. And so, you know, if you know my dad, if you want to say some words about my dad, you want to tell a story, we'd love that. Okay, Eric.
Oh, sorry, I have stage fright. Hello, Mike, Kako, I'm Eric, and I'm very close to Vince and the family, and of course Fred. And you know, Fred has been one of the few people that I consider a true warrior. And you're hearing the stories, but Fred was fearless in his conviction, fearless in his anti-war stance, and you heard the stories. Yeah, he's a person who's a man who really does what he believes in, his beliefs for peace, justice, social justice, environmental justice, and you can't say those words without Wai'anae, without Fred Dodge. A lot of people are following in his footsteps. I think Fred has paved the way for resistance. Hale Mohalo issues. I remember going to jail with Fred. I got arrested with Fred at Hale Mohalo. We got that's us with Gigi and with all the Hale Mohalo gang when they were trying to evict the people there. And I remember they had to carry us out, and we spent a few hours in the cell block in Pearl City. Yeah. So that was my honor to be in that cell block with Fred. It was air conditioned and it was cold, so, but we didn't last long because you know. But the whole Fred was involved in a lot of social issues, as you heard, and also his claim to fame also is Makua, and I think you might hear more about it later. Yeah, because Fred was with Anti-Frenchy and those and all. I mean, there's a long list, Sparky and all the Malama Makua gang, and that's another story in itself. And you can't talk about Fred without talking about Anti-Frenchy and, you know, Sparky, and, you know, so all those issues. But I just want to keep it short. The reason why is because I got to go on a Zoom and deal with drama now. So I was just joking with the gang that we need to establish a theater. So everybody that got dramas, that we can have theater over here, so everybody can act out their dramas, and then they can entertain us. But unfortunately, you got to deal with humans. But I love working with plants, rock, stones, and water. They're my closest friends, and but we keep the work going. We keep the Aina work going, keep the vai going. And I just have so much aloha for Fred and the family and all that Fred, all his ohana, his extended ohana, and mahalo Vince, all the work that you've done. We were out at, we did a Pōka'ī with students the other day, our Pōka'ī Ulu students, and we went on a boat, so we had about 50 students. We were covering water, fire, indigenous knowledge, sustainable energy, Ola Pono, and so. But and then William Aila was with us, and we hired the boat. We went out to Kahe, and turned around, and we went out to Ka'ena, and we headed out so that we could go and see Kahuku Point. But when we got out there, it was raining, it was pouring. But I just was thinking about Fred when we were out there, because we passed through Makua and all those battles, yeah. But and also out at Ka'ena Point, I was thinking about Vince, because we used to go out. He took us fishing out there, And going out with Vince is incredible, yeah, because that guy he's a chip off his father's block, yeah. So Vince is another fearless guy. And so with that, I will say mahalo so much. Mahalo to all the ohana out here and the extended ohana and all that you all do. And with that, aloha hui hou.
So next up we have Chrissy Kuehine. And I know this wonderful woman because she worked in my dad's office for, I don't know, forever, yeah?
Well, I got to work with him for 10 years, but I've been there for 33 years this past March.
Wow, at the Comprehensive Health Center. Yeah, but I remember when it was like, when it was small, right? The building was small and, I mean...
When I did Daniel's immunizations, and he didn't like me very much. He remembers me when Daniel, I don't know if Daniel remembers, but I gave you your vaccinations when you were a kid, and he didn't like me very much. He did not have very kind words for me, but we became friends later. Okay, all right. Well, I listen, I didn't get to spend time in jail with Dr. Dodge, and actually my time with him didn't feel like I was in jail either. And why I say that is, when I worked with him, I got the older and more mellow version of Dr. Dodge. From my understanding, there were medical assistants before me that they left crying sometimes because he was just that kind of person that, make sure you get it right for our patients. When I came along, I have to say that I was so fortunate, and so I feel so grateful to have known him and have worked for him. See, some of these are some of my memories, and for some of you, these are probably going to be your same memories. But as a medical assistant, I remember he always wanted to teach me, even if it was out of my scope. But as long as I wanted to learn, he was always willing to go the extra mile, take extra time. He had a dual head stethoscope. And so whenever I had a hard time and I go and say, Dr. Dodge, I can't really get the patient's blood pressure. I don't really know if there's, an irregular heartbeat. He'd take out that double-headed stethoscope and we'd go in there together, and he'd teach me. He'd bring me into the exam room, and we listened to the patient's heart together. He taught me how to assist with sigmoidoscopies. For those of you who don't know, we used to do them at the Comprehensive Health Center. I don't know if we were supposed to at that time, but anyway, he had a kit, and so then that way his patients didn't have to go to town. So I knew how to do that. I actually sutured simple wounds. I probably did a whole lot of things, thank goodness, back then. Probably, it was, oh great, you teach your medical assistant this. Nowadays it's like, oh my gosh, you can't teach your medical assistant this. So I counted myself lucky that I got to learn all those things from him. And quite honestly, it made me a really great medical assistant. I got to the point where I anticipated his every need before he even knew what the need was. So, and that's a testament to his commitment to teaching. And it's not an easy thing. Not all providers are into that. His commitment and dedication to his patients were reciprocal. I mean, I remember he never turned a patient away. Our schedule was always overbooked. As long as his patients didn't mind waiting, and they did, 2+ hours, they'd wait to see him. And he had no problem seeing whoever needed to be seen. There were times when if a patient didn't show up, they were no-show. He'd go out to their homes to try to find them, especially if it was something that he knew they needed to be seen for. And he even sent me out to those patients' homes too, to find them and administer whatever medication they were supposed to have gotten in the office. We don't do that now, I don't think. I don't think we send our MAs out to do that. He did teach me this. He taught me how to be frugal. Now, mind you, I was in my 20s. I didn't know what frugal was. I saw him eat his bread and his cheese and I'd see mold on the cheese, mold on the bread, and he would say how important it was not to waste food. just cut off the mold. He assured me there was no mold in Hawaii that was deadly. So I said, okay, and honestly, I'm hoping that's true. It must be, because I'm alive and I've been doing it since then. I realized the importance of saving trees, because I swear he's the only person that I know of that could turn a Post-it size piece of paper into at least 20 different separate reminders or messages. Honestly, it seemed insignificant to me until he explained how if everyone made the effort, how big of a difference it would make in helping our rainforests. Our community was gifted with a man who was Hawaiian at heart, loving the Aina, and showing special fondness for Moku Valley. It was only until I met Dr. Dodge that I was aware of the sacredness of the valley, cultural, archaeological sites, and endangered species. And actually, my family and I were fortunate enough to be able to gain access to Moku with Dr. Dodge to view the petroglyphs there. I will miss him, as you all will. I have missed him all these years since he retired the first time. He was genuine, with a kind heart, and truly someone that I feel blessed to have known and learned from. So thank you. Aloha, everyone.
I just want to add to my grandpa's frugalness, you guys, okay? First of all, if my grandpa was here, he would save his plate and go home and put them in the fridge and would use the same plate for 1 week. I'm talking one paper plate. You go in the fridge, get paper plates that is used, okay? Another thing is, every once in a while, my gramps and Popo, they would go on like a trip. So Popo would pull me on the side. She'd say, hey, Daniel, go into your grandfather's shed, and whatever is in there, throw it all out, okay? Because let me tell you, my grandfather had the greatest collection of like medical magazines, okay? No, I'm talking vertically stacked, like 20 by 40 feet of medical magazines, okay? This was like before Aloha Junkman came out. But if you never noticed, my gramps always had a decent pair of shoes on. And his shoes, he would use the rubber cement to patch his shoes. Okay, and nobody knew this, but he put in his own inserts. Yeah, he would go buy the good inserts. But for some reason, he couldn't throw out the inserts that came with the shoe. So there would literally be trash bags of shoe inserts, brand new, never used. I don't know what Gramps was saving them for, but if we ever had a shoe insert crisis, I know my grandpa would save us. I will tell you this, my Gramps, I don't know if his parents were workaholics, but my Gramps was a workaholic. And somehow I thought if I wasn't a doctor, I could escape the workaholism. It didn't work out too well for me. People used to ask me growing up, are you gonna be a doctor just like your grandpa? I'm like, I like Christmas, New Year's, holidays, you know what I'm saying? I like maybe like eat dinner with my family every once in a while. Growing up, my Gramps, he didn't put our family second, but he definitely put the community first. Yeah, and it's something that you can't teach it, but you can be raised in it, yeah? And the amount of sacrifice and willingness to give, he's the highest example for me, you know? I was lucky. I got the Fred Dodge that was hiking, running, going on trips. 26 years old, I got to do a lifetime trip with my grandpa. I had kind of like a mid-20s crisis, quit my job, and I got to go on a 2-week backside Molokai kayak paddle, which included 5 days on Kalaupapa. We went and spent every single night in a different valley in the backside of Pōka'ī, just hiking in the valleys all day and kayaking in the mornings. And you know, to just spend that much time with my grandfather, it will something that I will never forget. And it's something that I know that God, don't tell my kids, but I'm gonna steal their kids. I taking them on trips. Hopefully to have some kids while I'm still pretty young, because you know, I'm not getting any younger here. But I just wanted to share that, you know, she was talking about how frugal my grandpa was, and he really was, you guys. I kid you not. I didn't know how you could be a doctor and be broke. But somehow my grandpa could, you know what I'm saying? Like, you could go to his house and he's probably, you know, has the most humblest across the street from the ocean. Yeah, and he never got that house because it was across the street from the ocean. He got that house because he wanted to walk to work every day. Yeah, and not just walk to work. Grandpa knew every member of the houseless community, from our house to the comprehensive, like not just knew them, like knew what they had for breakfast. Or if they didn't have breakfast, he would bring them some breakfast. Grandpa was really intimate with this community, and you know, I'm grateful and I'm thankful that I have a role model like that, and I'm so happy that my kids get to hear the stories of their great-grandfather, because, you know, legends, they're inside each and every one of us, yeah, and sometimes we gotta find it, and my grandfather found it quite young in his life. I don't know if Auntie mentioned this, but he was a 1959 graduate of Thomas Jefferson Medical School. And I actually went there, and I looked in the yearbook of Thomas Jefferson Medical School, yeah? And it was crazy. There was no women doctors. Yeah, my grandfather was like the last in an era. And I believe that one of the things that his legacy is all the Native Hawaiian men and women that he helped to train, to teach, to carry on his legacy of caring for the community. And I just, you know, I think people should know how hard my grandfather worked to help to instill his knowledge to those that are currently practicing medicine. Thank you, guys.
Nancy, two things. Step as far away as you can, and then speak into the microphone as good as you can. All the way first. Go there, all the way over there. I have it on. Thank you.
Sorry, guys. Daniel said some things, so I thought I could add a little bit to that picture. So, for many, many years, my dad had a used Volkswagen Bug. Mostly blue. One red door, one yellow door. And we were 4 growing kids. And back then, you know, like, 6 of us are crammed into the Volkswagen Bug with our book bags, our lunch bag, and, you know, to go to school. And one day, when we went with him to his hospital rounds, there's a physician's parking right in the front of Queens Medical Center. And I'm looking to my right, and Dr. Ed Chesney's Jaguar's there, and I'm looking to my left, and Dr. Ching's brand new giant giant Cadillac is there. And so I'm like 9 years old, and Dad, how come we drive this car? How come we can't have like a nicer looking car or a bigger car? So my dad said, well, if we bought a car like Dr. Ed Chesney, that would be a good financial move, because that thing's going to increase in value. We buy this monster gas guzzler next door to our car, this Cadillac. He said, the moment you drive it off the lot, it's going to decrease in value. We're not doing that. So come Christmas time, for the next probably 3 years, between Christmas and New Year's, before the year ended, he'd have me sit with him every night, and he'd pull out his checkbook, and he said, this is why the first year, he said, this is why we're never buying a new car. He's never buying a new car. He said, because the money could be better spent. And so he'd pull out all these things he got in the mail from the United Farm Workers. Later on, it was Doctors Without Borders, Southern Poverty Law Center, all these organizations. And he'd tell me, what each organization did. And then we would decide, he'd say, we're one of the lucky ones. We got some extra money left over this year. Let's figure it out how we want to spend it. And so we would discuss, oh, we'll send $100 to this group because, you know, all the things they're doing to end racism in the South. Or, you know, these are the bravest doctors on earth. They go into where there's war-torn countries and they do everything they can to save lives. Doesn't matter which side. And so that is how he instilled in me, like, how money could be spent in the best manner possible. But yeah, so he never owned a new car in his life, ever. He was, you know, he was happy driving whatever. I've been driving this trip, his last car, and it's quite a putt-putt, you know. This thing, you know, turn off the engine and it's like rattling and, you know, croaking and doing all kinds of things before the engine dies. But that was him, you know. He just, it served its purpose. It got him from point A to point B. That's all he cared about. Anyway, and then the whole thing with the paper plate thing. So, twice a year. So we were Catholics when we were growing up till I was 13. And then my dad went to our family priest and he said, you know, my son Vince is getting close to draft age and I don't want him to fight. I don't want him to be drafted into the Vietnam War. He said, I have to do something about this. And the priest said, politics has no place in religion. I advise you to ignore the politics. My dad came home and he'd rather give up religion than send his first son to go fight in the Vietnam War. But anyway, so twice a year, my dad was cheap. You know, that's how he saved money so he could give it away at the end of the year. He would clean out the refrigerator. Nobody was allowed to throw stuff out. My mom would go to a double mass because she didn't want to be a part of the result of cleaning the refrigerator. So I'd pull something and go, Dad, this thing is so shriveled I can't tell if it was a peach, a nectarine, or a plum. He said, it's okay. Is there any mold on it? Yeah, it looks like a little. Trim it off. It's going in. Take out the pit. You know, like, Dad, this I think was once a chunk of cheese, but it's covered in mold. Trim off the mold. The little mold never killed anyone. Later, he did amend that, and he said, yeah, that was bad. That was bad advice. But anyway, he made an omelet. And I remember talking to my younger brother a few years ago, and we both agreed that, like, we felt like it was so exciting, like maybe we're going to discover a cure for cancer making this omelet. And my younger brother said, you know, it didn't taste too bad either. So my mom missed the whole thing, and yeah, that's my dad. Anyway, I'm sorry, I'm going to hand this over to someone else.
I'm drawing a blank on your last name. Yep. And we're going to come a little bit further here. We have Auntie Donna Costa.
Aloha.
Right up to you. A little bit more this way.
As Jim says, I'm Donna Costa, and I've known Dr. Dodge, and I met Dr. Dodge in 1979 when we moved out here to Wai'anae. We are dairy farmers, and we had 5 children. So I spent a lot of time with Dr. Dodge. If they weren't falling off of a horse or getting hurt in football or whatever it was, and Dr. Dodge was there at 9 o'clock at night, at 9 o'clock in the morning. He was always there. And as everybody has said, he was so humble. He was so unlike your usual doctor. He was just there. One night he had to take a boil a really ugly boil off of my son's finger because he wanted to play football the next day for St. Louis. And so he had to lance it. And my son sat there and he cut it. And my son didn't make a sound. And he said, my gosh, this kid is just he's so stoic, like an Indian. He didn't know that when we got to the car, he was not stoic. But anyway, it's a privilege to have spent as much time as I had with him, including when he was passing. Patient, calm, quiet, never complaining. He was an absolutely amazing man. On a personal note, I have a grandson who is now 31 years old and was very severely injured when he was 2. Dr. Dodge, when he was 5, helped me to get the medical care that he needed when he wasn't getting. As a result of that, he did get the medical care he needs. And I will be eternally grateful for Dr. Dodge taking care of that. I have the privilege of reading this, which was written by one of our Women of Wai'anae officers, our Secretary-Treasurer, Sue Carpenter. Sue is not here. She's on a trip to the mainland, and she wrote this. Even though I have reminded Fred and Karen several times in the past 20 years of the role Fred played in bringing my husband Dan into my life, now that Fred is gone, I attribute more importance to that singular act of Fred's generosity. I think of Fred as both an unassuming matchmaker and lodestar. Fred and Karen appeared in our lives in the mid-'80s when Dan was living on Kauai, and I was a single mom on Oahu with a young son. The 4 of us met at a human potential growth training in Honolulu. When the training ended, Fred offered to take all the graduates on a Napali Coast Zodiac trip. Dan, in response, offered his Kauai home as lodging for those of us coming from Oahu. This was a luxury. I wondered if I could afford, but I pushed myself to go. The trip was spectacular, and the overnight at Dan's house, life-changing. While I lost touch with Fred and Karen, my friendship with Dan grew. 2.5 years later, Dan moved from Kauai to Honolulu. We eventually married and had another son and built a home in Kahalu, where we lived for 18 years. Once our nest emptied, we made an unlikely decision to move to the leeward coast. I got it in my head that life would improve if we lived where the sun sets, not where it rises. And I convinced my husband as well. Our Honolulu and Windward friends were shocked. What? Wai'anae? It's hot. It's dangerous. It's too far away. It was then I felt the power of the lodestar Fred Dodge. Even though we hadn't seen him in over 20 years, we derived confidence in the faith that he and Karen were probably somewhere on the leeward coast, and we would renew our friendship. As destiny would have it, the overgrown lot with junk cars where we decided to build our house was 2 doors down from Fred and Karen on Pōka'ī Bay Street. For over 10 years, we have been blessed by our friendship with the Dodge Young family. My involvement in the Women of Wai'anae and Karen has made our friendship even stronger. When I look up into the sky at night, I like to imagine Fred as a star spreading his light along our journey, encouraging us into the unknown. Thanks, Fred, for guiding Dan to me and the 2 of us to Wai'anae. That is by Sue Carpenter. Thank you.
Hi everyone. Can you hear me? Now can you hear me? Hi everyone, my name is Summer and I am Fred's youngest stepdaughter. And My sister Miley and I grew up with Fred as our dad when our mother Karen married him. And I just want to share a little bit about what life was like with Dad when I think about kind of the memories. And Miley, you'll be able to say, yes, I remember this. Growing up with Fred as my dad, I remember when I was little, we never got to eat grapes because he protested the working conditions of the farmers. Wow. Dad was, I remember being exposed to Billie Holiday, Charlie Parker, Thelonious Monk. He loved jazz. And if it wasn't jazz playing on the radio, it was NPR. And you always knew if a Republican presidential candidate won, sorry if you're political views, because he would swear up the wazoo and down, and he'd leave these long tirade, depressed messages. For those of you that remember the day when we used to have the voicemail and you could leave a personalized message? Dad will leave that message. But the story I wanted to share, how many of you are from the Wai'anae Coast? Yeah. So our family home is right along this street on Pōka'ī Road. And for those of you familiar with Pōka'ī, in the evenings, the memory I have of my dad is every evening we'd get the dogs and we'd walk down Pōka'ī Road. And we'd get to the end of Pōka'ī Road and we'd walk along sewers. And I remember being uncomfortable, because there was a lot of houseless people living there. And every night we'd walk along sewers. And I remember being uncomfortable, a little bit scared of the sketchiness of the communities there. But I tell you, it's burned in my memory, when we'd walk every evening through sewers at Maili Beach Park, all the people living in those tents would yell out, "Doc! Hey, Doc! Doc! Doc!" And Dad would take his time and go to every single tent. And he would lovingly go right up to them, check how they're doing. I've seen him crawl into tents, check their ears, turn on the light, check their eyes, talk with them, counsel them. And it was just an amazing experience. And I watched Dad do this every single evening in elementary school growing up. And so, Daniel talked a little bit about the impact Grandpa had on his life. And for me, seeing Dad do this every day, for me, it really taught me the importance of giving back to my community and using my education to help my people. And so what's really interesting about all of his kids is we all ended up in different walks of life. I'm in community college education. I see some of my colleagues here. My sister went into politics and law. We have artists, we have cooks, but we all have a strong sense of connection to our homeland, especially to Wai'anae. And we all know that Dad gave us the kuleana to go get educated, come back home and give back. So it is to Dad that I love you, I miss you. Thank you.
This is Angela Hoppy Cruz. Thank you so much for standing up.
Can you guys hear me? Aloha and hawai'i. I wanted to, on behalf of our grandmother Billie Haugi and our family, share a little bit about Dr. Dodge. I call him Uncle Dodge. Legends live. I heard Uncle Eric talking about legends, and they live in the inspiration and the stories that continue to carry on. All of Dr. Dodge's children and stepchildren that continue to give back to community. And so I've been very blessed to become part of Billie Haugi's Ohana, and she shared that it was Uncle Dodge that helped to save the Wai'anae Coast Comprehensive. And truly, he's saved so many lives by going into each of those tents by teaching the MAs, because as you know, we're scrapped always for medical practitioners, to have them be part of the solution. And so Grammy shared that it was just his dedication to serve as the only doctor for I don't know how many years along the coast, and having to prevent us from driving all the way to downtown Honolulu for medical support. He was the primary care physician for all of my husband, David, who, like Uncle Eric knows, is good friends with rocks and plants. So David is all the way over there. But he was a primary care physician for all of the children, and for a short time before he retired, some of the grandchildren of our family. Dr. Dodge is the reason why my husband is able to do what he does. Through Malama Mokua and the establishment of the military's need to compromise and establish Oahu Army Nature Reserve and Preservation. That is why my husband is able to help in terms of saving people, but saving and helping to do what he can and preserve Hawaii's ecosystem. So that was part of the monumental work that Dr. Dodge was able to do. And so Great Grammy just wanted me to say that it's definitely about people, but it's Dr. Dodge's recognition of the unique and valuable ecosystem of Hawaii, and that all of it has to be saved. And so that legacy will continue to live, and that legend will live in every act of kindness that we do. And thank you, Dr. Dodge, and thank you to his family that has welcomed our family into their homes. Okay.
And now, Kyle Kajihiro, mahalo.
Aloha kako, everyone. My name is Kyle Kajihiro. I work with Hawaii Peace and Justice, and I teach at the University of Hawaii in Ethnic Studies. And I've known Fred since I returned home. When I first came back to Hawaii from the continent, I started working for a group called the American Friends Service Committee, which is a long-standing peace and social justice organization. And one of the first sites that we got involved in when I came back was Makua. And so I sought out some of the leaders in the peace movement at Makua, Sparky Rodriguez, Leandro White, and Fred Dodge. And, you know, he's always been an amazing example. There's a saying that Miles Horton from the Highlander Institute says, "You make the road by walking." I feel that Fred is one of these people that made a way when none was there, going up in a peaceful way against the most powerful military in the world, inspired by activists like the Protect Kaho'olawe Ohana. They took on the American military at Makua, beginning with Sister Anna McEnany, with vigils in front, Christmas vigils in front of the gates of Makua, and then eventually leading to the lawsuits and other actions that we now have access to the valley. And for 20 years, is it 20 years yet? No live fire training. Next year, 20 years of no live fire training. So these are all the efforts of Malama Makua, a small, scrappy group with great t-shirts and strong legs, taking people into the valley. Because one of the things that I think is important about these places, the military, when they've taken over lands, they count on the fact that by putting up a fence, they cut off the pilina, the relationship between people and the aina. And when you cut off that relationship, you're basically creating orphans of the people who have connections to that place. So how do we reconnect? How do we begin to save these places? One of the first things is to fall in love again with these aina. And by having access and walking these lands and becoming intimate and familiar with the sights and the beauty of these places, that's how you begin to fall in love, and that's how you step up to protect these places. And Fred taught us that, right? He was a hiker. He went all over these mountains, and he would always lead the access into the valley. In 2000, when was it? 2001, when we had the settlement agreement between the Army and Malama Makua, it opened up a new chapter where it enabled Malama Makua to have regular access to the valley. And while it seemed like a small thing at the time, that was a way for us to bring thousands of people into the valley. And Fred and Leandra were the two that held it down for decades. Like they were doing it every month, taking people in there. And so now we have thousands of people who've been to Makua, have been past that gate, past the barbed wire, have seen the petroglyphs, the Ki'ipohaku, the Heiau and Ko'a and other sites in there. They've touched that aina, they've given whole kupu to that aina, they've sung and chanted to that aina, and that's how we begin to build those relationships again. And so Fred is in Makua, he's in all of us, and so I just wanted to thank him for leading that way and making a path for us. And if you would all join me in a revolutionary salute to Fred, if you could raise your left fist. In the Latin American tradition, you would call out someone's name, and everyone will respond, presente. It's a roll call that he's still with us. Okay, so if you could. Fred Dodge, presente. Thank you.
Hello. I'm so sorry. I got nervous. I should have been reading from this. And so Fred was an amazing human being. He was kind, smart, and above all else, a humanitarian. When I moved here with Grandpa, in the 50s, there were no doctors. Maybe 1 or 2 afternoons a week, someone would come out to the Wai'anae Coast to serve the community. So we got the Wai'anae Coast Comprehensive Center established, but it was hard going, and the federal government came in to tell us that they were going to shut us down. Single-handedly, Fred saved the center by agreeing to leave his IAEA practice and becoming the first medical director of the Wai'anae Coast Comprehensive. Over the years, he cared for thousands of us. He lived aloha. Thank you.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you, Daniel. I'm Sham Dodge, one of Fred's grandsons. I think it was about maybe 13 or 14 years ago, I was attempting to write a book about my grandfather's life. And he attempted to thwart me at every step of the way. He refused to let me interview him about any subject, any topic, and encouraged me to talk to other activists, to family members, encouraged me to educate myself about Makua. And when I talked to these activists or these family members or other people, they all inevitably talked about my grandfather. And when I report back to him, he would say, you know, you're not getting the picture. You need to tell the story of Makua. And I'd respond that it seemed like it wasn't possible to tell that story without sharing his role in everything. And then he'd sent me to what he called his white room, which is a room that was filled with these file boxes, right, Karen? Disorganized, you know, old newspaper clippings, environmental impact reports. Eventually, it seemed like too big of a project for me at the time, so I let it go. But he was trying to teach me a lesson that it took me years to learn. You know, many of you here spent much more time with my grandfather than I did because I grew up on the mainland in California. And my interactions with him were few and far between. When we come visit here, the Oahu, the place of my birth, he always made sure to teach me how to trespass, How to break federal laws. We'd go on hikes, and he always made sure to take a picture of me next to a no trespassing sign on the legal side of the fence. But he also instilled within me a wonder and respect and connection with the natural world. It was important to get muddy, to get deep into the forest. I remember one time when I was 13, we were staying at my grandma Aiko's house, and the last day of our trip, my grandpa arrived, and he wanted to take me on a hike and promised my mom that he'd have me back in time for our flight. Many hours later, he brought me back covered head to toe in thick mud. And I think we had like maybe an hour before boarding time. He'd also occasionally come to California, usually on his way back from some backpacking adventure, and stay with us to spend time with his California grandkids. And he always made a point of getting down in the dirt with us, of climbing trees, just really paying attention to the natural world. But he also didn't seem like the man my mom, the myth, the legend she'd built in our household, or the person who was so respected here in Hawaii. He seemed like a dude who was just backpacking across the world. He was this lanky, loping guy in hiking boots who would, scoop veggie pasta on his plate and kick back and talk story with my mom and my dad. And he seemed someone who was just riding on the wings of adventure at all times. I also remember that after a particular trip where we went to Belize, he had these trophies, these bumps on his skull and on his neck, and I think one or two on his arms. And they were these circular bumps. They're pretty big. They were bot flies, which I don't know if you know what that is. But it's a bot fly captures a mosquito and it lays its eggs on it, and then when the mosquito bites you, it inserts the eggs into you, and then I don't think I've ever seen him more proud to show something off. Take more relish in describing that if he didn't surgically remove it, what would happen.
What would happen?
They'll dig their way out.
Problem solved.
But the truth is that I spent most of my childhood missing my family. I had this longing for my cousins like Daniel and Chisa, for my aunties, my uncles, my grandmas, and my grandpa. And growing up, I only had one grandpa. Occasionally when he remembered, maybe 3 or 4 months after a birthday, a package would arrive in the mail. And inside of it were these chewed up, cracked marbles that he may have found on the roadside, some rusty jacks. Nice. And we played with them. And the truth is that those little, what other people view as garbage, as little broken toys, they meant the world to me, because it meant that my grandfather was thinking about me. That, on his walk to work in the morning or maybe the way back, he saw something and he thought about me. I once heard that a good man takes care of his family and a great man sacrifices for a cause greater than self-interest. And I wondered what I would be, and I wondered who my grandfather was, because as a kid I didn't really know him that well. I just knew that when I came here, everyone spoke of him with such reverence. My second to last trip, where the access to Moku Valley with my grandfather, the second last one I took with him, he leaned on my shoulder for most of the short hike, with his other hand holding a walking stick. And he referred to me as his trusty grandson. And then we got down in the dirt at one point, and we were just sifting through the dust, looking at different pebbles, different rocks, twigs, identifying bugs. And for a moment, we were just like two little kids. Or like how he was when he'd visit us in California. Just completely absorbed in the moment, in the small details of the natural world. And that's when it dawned on me. He'd want this said at his memorial, that this is not the story or just the celebration of Fred Dodge. This is really a celebration of the earth, of the Aina. And that we can talk about the big things, the big ideas, the big life well lived, but it's also about the small things. And when you care for the land, you care for your family, you care for everyone. And I realized that my grandfather was a good man because he took care of the land and took care of us, and that made him a great man. And now, when I pay attention to the small things, when I get into the dirt or the sand with my son, I don't miss my grandfather anymore. I remember him. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Very good, very good. Yeah, a well thought out speech.
Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. How you folks doing? Enjoying the stories? Me too. Me too. It's so wonderful to I don't know, hear the diversity and the little things, you know. I got some more stories. We have a good friend, William Ayla, would like to come and say a few words, and then you see the taiko drum folks are setting up, so they're gonna set up and they're gonna start in about 10 minutes. You guys gonna be ready? There? Yep. So they got about 10 minutes, and after they're done, we're gonna continue the sharing. So there's more food. Go eat. Yeah. All right, William.
Mohammedans. Hard to follow that. Fred was amazing. But he was amazing in the most humble way possible. I never saw Fred excited. I never saw him raise his voice. I never saw him get mad. Fred was calm, cool, and resilient. And I remember when we first got together at Fred's house to organize Malama Makua. I remember Fred sort of standing off to the side, being very quiet, being very observing, because we had some pretty strong personalities in the room. We had Auntie Frenchie. And Fred and Auntie Frenchie had this unique relationship, whereas he could tell her things that nobody else could. And she would never call him Fred, she'd call him Kauka, which is doctor in Hawaiian. She'd always call him Kauka. And Fred had this superpower. The superpower was he would stand on the side and we would be having the discussion, And anytime the discussion came to a point and there was not agreement on how to move forward, Fred would simply come in and say a few words. And he would get everyone to think about their positions and the need to get past our positions and the need to come to a solution. So he was a very strategic guy, but he never came out with strategic plans. What he did was he kind of stood on the side and just asked questions. And in those questions, as the discussion occurred, we would be led to a solution that was good for all. And a strategy when you're dealing with the army that was good for all. Fred was that good. That was his superpower, that he could just stand on the side and say a few words, and in those few words, get a group to come together on controversial issues. That was his superpower. And so in the 22 years of makahiki ceremonies at Makua, and you multiply them by 2 times, because we do it twice a year, an opening and a close. So I think we're up to like 43 ceremonies. And when Fred was with us, at the end of each ceremony, he would be there with his camera, and we'd all be standing by the Makua Ahu, and he would be taking the picture. And we would always try to get him to be in the picture, and he would always refuse to be in the picture. I don't think we ever got him, as I remember, in the picture, but he took. So in effect, Fred was and is our makahiki historian. And at some point, I know there's probably 40 plus photographs of people that were this big or didn't exist at the first makahiki ceremony who are now 20-year-olds. And I remember we used to be outside the gate trying to get in. And now we have Keiki running around inside Makua, and that's partially due to Fred. His vision, his always moving forward. Sometimes it's an inch, sometimes it's a foot, but always moving forward. And always getting us to think of a way to move forward. And that's my aloha for Fred. And I know that there are members of Malama Makua and there are members of the Hui, and there is a chant that calls for everyone to come together and pull in one direction. So I'm looking all around because I know some of you, and I think we should do it, and we should do it for as many times as people feel it's necessary. You want to jump in, and it's called Eku Mau Mau. Eku Mau Mau! Eku Mau Mau! Eku Hulu Hulu Ikala na wao! Ekula na wao! Ekua Huki! Ekua Ko! Ekua Mau! Mau Kai Ulu E! Kulia! Eku Mau Mau! Ekua! Eku Mau Mau! Eku Hulu Hulu Ikala na wao! Ekua! Ekula na wao!
Ekua! Ekua Huki! Ekua Ko! Ekua Mau! Mau Kai Ulu E Huki E Kulia!
Ikua! Ikula na bao! Ikua! Ikua huki! Ikua ko! Ikua mau! Mau kai ulu e kulia! Ikua! Ikua! Ikua!
Kua huki! Kua ko! Kua mau! Mau kai ulu e kulia!